think it just dawned on me while talking through things that I've been busy with. I'm probably the worst exponent of work in progress limits. So maybe as a start, just to see, since I'm from South Africa and working in the Africa regions for Standard Bank, can I maybe see some hands in terms of who of you have visited South Africa, let's say in the past 10 years, some hands to see. All right, so there's been a few, so I'll have to work some magic here to get some more of you over to South Africa fairly soon. Right, so I thought maybe a good way to start before we get into the details of the actual case studies, just to share with you some interesting facts about South Africa, some fun, interesting facts. So let's have a look. Right, so first of all, since we are in Texas, South Africa is about twice the size of Texas, and probably best known city in South Africa is Cape Town. Most of the guys, most of the tourists really like to visit Cape Town. Something else to share also is the first heart transplant was done by Dr. Chris Barnard in 1968. The first successful one, that must be said. There's been a few before. Then interestingly, for the folks that enjoy swimming, the creepy crawly was also invented in South Africa. And I know it sounds a bit like I'm giving you a history lesson here, but in 1972, so maybe when you get back home and have a look in your pool and see if you've got one of these creepy crawlies in your pool. Some famous people that come from South Africa. Elon Musk was born in Pretoria. And for those of you that also watch the Daily Show, Trevor Noah, also from South Africa, and a few others like Charlize Theron. Now, interestingly, when you think about the Big Mac burger, and we look at, first of all, we think about currency. So if you look at from a South Africa side, you'll probably get about 13 rands for each of your US dollars. But interestingly enough, when you go and buy your Big Mac, in South Africa, you'll probably get it for about 50% cheaper than what you'll pay for it in the States. And when I looked at those numbers, I was starting to think, what are they putting in those Big Macs in Switzerland that you have to pay $7.54 for an actual Big Mac? So now that I've got you guys thinking about the last time you had your last Big Mac and maybe starting to plan your holiday to Cape Town come December, let's start talking a bit about Standard Bank. Who is Standard Bank? So Standard Bank's got a rich history. We've been around for about 152 years. We're also the biggest financial institution in Africa with a range of services from corporate investment banking, retail and business banking, and insurance. We also boast assets of about $130 billion. And if we look at them, we're also the fifth largest company overall in South Africa with about 49,000 employees at the moment. Maybe just some contents in terms of IT. We've got about 4,200 permanent staff in IT and another 1,600 contractors working for us. Now, just to set the context in terms of when we look at our various portfolios that we have from a SAFE perspective, if you look at our earnings, so most of our earnings is based from the South Africa, but our slogan talks about Africa is our home, we drive our growth. So we've got a big focus in terms of driving our Africa strategy and moving Standard Bank, or better known in some of the other African countries as Stanbic Bank. Now let's start by talking about some of the business challenges, and I want to take you back to 2013. And our group CIO probably best described this as IT being on a burning platform. At this point in time, we were busy with two big core banking transformations. We also were starting to see challenges in our ability to serve our customers since banking was starting to shift towards the digital environment. Customers no longer wanted to be just providing services in a branch or on an ATM, but I want to start making use of digital platforms. So there were some key challenges for us that we needed to start address. If we look at some of our numbers that we looked when we started looking into what's causing some of these challenges, you can see on screen what was the actual time it took for us to be able to deliver a project from where it initiated all the way into deploying it to our actual customers. So it took us about 300 days to get something to market. And the employees on the ground, if you look at our organizational health index, people in Standard Bank weren't that happy at the moment. They felt there's a lack of direction from leadership, and people weren't really that engaged, not a happy place to work. And from a cost perspective, our IT costs were also on the rise. We've seen more and more, we're paying a lot more, unit costs were increasing, but the actual value that's getting delivered decreased. Now, moving from 2013, based on those findings, based on the things that we're starting to see, we shifted and moved to a new IT strategy that's basically built on 4 fundamental pillars. It talks about focusing on quality of service, time to market, or maybe more importantly, to talk about responsiveness to market. We've seen in the past, time to market, time getting things into production or to your customer faster, often just means when you're spending more time afterwards fixing defects that cause problems later on when we introduce new things into the market. The other thing it talks about sustainability. When we drive the strategy forward, how do we actually make that sustainable? And later on, I'll share a bit more in terms of the importance of culture and leadership, shifting leadership and culture, and now that actually helps us to drive the strategy forward. And then finally, affordability. So we're not really talking about a cost-cutting exercise. Often when we talk about strategy, there's always a costing involved, but we actually had to put cost back into our budget to start strengthening some of our capabilities that got really weak over time. So why a journey? So most of you've probably spent quite a lot of time in a large corporate, maybe in a large corporate, and you've often seen in IT, there's always something new. There's always this latest new thing that IT is busy with. Now, I don't want to mention specific initiatives, but over the decade that I've spent in the bank, there's always the new thing, and those things probably have a shelf life between 12 to 15 months. And you'll often see that a lot of guys who's been around for 20 years, maybe in the bank, they'll provide lip service to that because they really know that this thing too shall pass and there'll be another new thing that's going to come along, but not of this journey. So if we start and look at where we started in 2014, so the strategy was set. Now the thing here is when we started the strategy, and maybe something that we looked at when we looked at the strategy was, when we started in 2014, we didn't know we're going to apply the Scaled Agile Framework. We didn't have all the answers of how we're going to apply those 4 pillars and drive us towards success. So we started in 2014 with a number of pilots, and those pilots we started to explore and see how Agile methods and techniques and Kanban, as well as some engineering things, DevOps kind of things started to test that. How can we actually start implementing these things? Shifting from 2014, 2015 to 2016, that was really the tipping point for us, where we moved away from these pilots and really started to scale our organization into the Scaled Agile Framework. And then finally, 2017 was the rise where we started getting our teams into cadence. So that's the shift, getting from 2014 all the way to 2017 at a high level. Now let's talk for a moment about this first Agile project. So 2014 started, and maybe to give you some context, the actual project that we were busy with was called the Internet Banking Refresh Program. And this program was already, they've been busy with it with about 12 to 13 months. And at this point in time, they only got as far as implementing it or getting a design signed off. They were still busy getting the design signed off, and they were not moving forward. Business got frustrated. They wanted to get this product into the market, but they were not moving. And interestingly enough, I'm not sure if it was incidental or if it was planned, a number of our IT executives actually visited Silicon Valley, went to some of the top tech companies and startups to go and see how are these guys delivering software. How can we shift as an organization away from our traditional waterfall method coupled with a project management framework? How can we move forward and really start delivering on this IT strategy? So the program really focused on, so when we got into, when these guys returned, they shared some of the information that we received, what they've seen in Silicon Valley, and we decided to partner with a well-known software delivery company that also had a view that was also present in South Africa, and we decided to partner with them and to start implementing this new framework that we refer to as continuous delivery. There was a framework at a team level that we started to work on. So we partnered with them, and we started with an incepting the solution, And that was the first time that Standard Bank saw a minimum viable product, defining an MVP for a product that we're going to take to market. The focus of the teams also here was to start breaking work down into smaller pieces, start writing your user stories and features, as well as to start visualizing work. Before, work were very much hidden from, there was no visibility in terms of what we were busy with. So really those two things in terms of breaking work down and then also to make things visible. But the most important thing here was for the first time, there was a demo. Business stakeholders as well as IT could see what this product looks like. How is this product starting to evolve? Every 2 weeks, there was something in a demo that they could see. And that was a really great experience, moving away from, we start with requirements and then IT takes it and they go and develop it, and then you probably see it for the first time when you do UAT. Business could now be actively involved and experience and see how this solution is getting shaped. And that was a real key tipping point for us to bring these two things together. Built on that, based on what we started to see real value in this. So at the point I was looking after the methods team, I was asked to start documenting how this actual framework works, because we wanted to start implementing it in other areas. So we brought together a small coaching team of about 4 to 5 coaches. Then we started to roll this out into a few other areas, starting to explore and starting to implement it in other areas as well. Now, this was one of the pilots that we started with. The next one I wanted to talk to you is about that SDLC. And now a lot of my colleagues back at home will tell me, so about 8 years ago, we spent a few times trying to refresh this SDLC, and we refer to it as the blue process. And at this point in time, we decided, how are we going to take this forward? We've got this big SDLC, how are we going to actually change this? So we got Stephen Bell in to come and hold a Kaizen event for us. So Stephen Bell came along, we decided on an area, so we chose our ATM space, where we started to visualize what does this actual process look like, from where ideation start all the way to getting it into production. Now, maybe just for terminology-wise, so there's 2 key words here. So Kaizen talks about small incremental improvement, and then a Kaikaku, which talks about more radical change that's required. Now, if you look at the results, so we started to visualize this, what are all these actual steps involved to get something from start to finish? And we spend about 70 to 80% of our time on process, governance, and finance. We also took about 700 days in the ATM space from where we start initiating it, having a new business idea, all the way to getting it into production. And I'm sure you guys still recall, and if you maybe still have some of those long documents, those functional specifications that can run over 200 pages, and then those massive list of signatures that's required. And when you were one of the signatures, the persons that need to sign on those, you always look for that one specific name. If you saw that this person signed it off, you probably didn't even bother to go and sign the document off. You'll just sign it and then pass it on to the next person. So there was a lot of unnecessary long lead times and delays to get things done. And at that point, where we were in our journey, business was also seen as the customer. As IT, we forgot about who the actual customer is, the person that walks into the branch, the person that uses the ATM. We still had that mindset of business is our actual customer. Now, some of the results that we've seen, so we pulled this team together, the ATM team, we pulled them into a room, created a cross-functional team that really focused on, and this was less about setting up an Agile or Scrum type frame, but really applying Kanban to start removing those unnecessary waste. So we shifted from about 44 artifacts that was required before to a single artifact. We also said it's not optional to be virtually co-located. We really wanted the team to sit together and work together as a single team. And then finally, something that we really saw from a support or from an incident perspective, we used to have about 4,000 incidents on our ATM network of over 6,000 in South Africa, going all the way down to about 80 incidents. So we could really see from an Agile side and from a Kanban flow how things can actually work in this organization. Now, there was one thing still missing: infrastructure. Now, I'm sure a lot of you guys were maybe project managers in your past life, or currently a project manager, and you're busy managing an application project, and about 6 months into the project, you realize that you need infrastructure. And then what needs to happen? Now you're starting to phone the infrastructure guys. They assign an infrastructure project manager, and then you need to start the process. We need to talk to vendor management, procurement, and that could take us anything from 6 weeks to 6 months. And that doesn't really talk well in terms of being able to be predictable to our actual stakeholders in terms of delivering solutions. So the DevOps team, and I'm not sure why we called them the DevOps team. I think in 2014 it was probably a buzzword, so the guys decided to stick with DevOps. But it really talks about automation. So the focus here was running with a pilot that see that we can, how quickly can we provision an end-to-end application service stack. And the target was to get it done in 30 minutes. So think about the organization view from where we before were with 6 months to between 6 months and 6 weeks, getting it actually done in 30 minutes time. That was a big realization in terms of how technology can actually help us and what is possible if you apply the right technology. This next item was, talked about working with the Internet Banking Refresh program. So those guys were running, they were getting work turned out, but we were struggling to get work into production. So the team was set to start developing a deployment pipeline that with a press of a button can actually promote code from your development environment all the way into production. And we were actually successful by being able to achieve that. It was our first blue-green deployment implementation that we did. Now, all in all, these were really great examples for us to showcase both to our business stakeholders as well as IT in terms of what is achievable. But we were still working in the system. We were running about 600 projects every year, still with traditional governance in place. So we almost got to a block in terms of what we can achieve. A lot of the work that we've done by getting these pilots done and the result that we've seen was because of a lot of executive influence, helping the teams, steering the teams to actually get things done. So there's some examples for us. So again, if you take back, put your project manager or your developer hat on and think about if you were one of these, we were working in one of these teams, but you still had this system outside that's almost working against you. You're still required to follow traditional governance. You still need to fill in those forms every time your team wants to get into the SIT environment. You need to fill in a form, you need to complete it. As a project manager, if you're working in this environment where you need to roll up information, the PMO will still come and ask you for the same information, even though you don't apply those metrics anymore. They still ask for that traditional schedule of 200 or 300 lines, showcasing each deliverable. Those things create a lot of complexities for us. Other simple things to think about is, for example, the environment where you're working in. So facilities management, it's not just always possible to go and start putting things up against a wall space. The other thing is when you sit on a floor where a lot of the guys are still working in cubicles or working in a very structured way, and all of a sudden you pop up every day at 9 o'clock and have a stand-up. The traditional behavior is also we always have a meeting. We always need to have a meeting to schedule and talk to people. And we shifted that where people were having conversation at their tables, and that created quite a lot of conflict between the teams working the traditional way, sitting right next to you, versus how this team is working. And then there's other things as well, like architecture. Architects were still very much focused on building that end-state design instead of being more flexible in terms of architecture. So that gave us great sight and information in terms of where do we want to go and what is actually possible. So our group CIO made the decision, based on what we've seen, that we're going to scale. We cannot move this forward and continue just with a few pilots. We need to move forward. So during 2016, the decision was made that we're actually going to move forward with this initiative. So we started off with a design, and any of you that's been involved in a big organizational shift, we have to reorganize a large number of people. And at this point, there was about 2,000 FTEs that we had to move away from a traditional silo construct into teams, programs, and portfolios. There's a lot of work involved. There's a lot of difficult conversations that needed to happen. So our group CIO tasked each of the portfolio CIOs to engage with their business stakeholders and start building these teams. Now, something interesting, maybe context in terms of South Africa. South Africa's got an unemployment rate of about 27.8%. And obviously, with a restructure like this, there's potentially going to be people that won't have jobs after this actual redesign. So at this point, our group CIO, with our head of human capital, made the decision that we won't let any people go. So the people, once we've done the constructs that weren't available or didn't have positions at that point in time, were placed in the marketplace. So we decided to run a program to really help these guys to maybe go back to their roots. So some folks that were project managers before, that still had the aptitude, so they went for aptitude assessments, went for an actual development, a UX, or a test engineering course. So we provided that opportunity. So yes, there were people that left that couldn't fit into this new structure, but really tried to help the guys to say, well, you can actually go back to your roots. Where do you come from as a project manager? You were a Java dev before, or you were a C developer. So we provided that opportunity to them. The next thing that worked really well for us, as you go through this design and moving these people, changing into RTEs, building your actual feature or agile teams, was to set up a leadership guild. It's not just about setting up, creating RTs or building your arts. There's a lot of other moving parts as well. We need to think about governance. How's your governance going to change? What is your PMO offering going forward? How is finance going to change when you start doing fixed capacity teams? So the leadership guild was something that we held every month. We brought together all the area heads, came together, and we have robust discussions in terms of what are we trying to achieve. And some of those things really sometimes got heated when we talked about what's going to happen to timesheets. Where are those kind of things? What kind of metrics are we using? When we also set up these design, a lot of questions pop up. What is the actual right number? What is the right number of feature analysts or developers and testers that need to fit into a design? And what really helped us here, because at this point in time, we actually didn't have any SPCs in our organization. So we worked with a strategic consulting firm that helped us with some guidance in terms of setting up our value streams and forming our arts, which really helped us quite a bit. So the target was set for the 1st of July to start working. The target year for the teams was by the 1st of July, the teams needed to be co-located, works needs to start to be visualized, and then also to have self-regulated teams. So we got to the 1st of July and teams started to move into this construct. And it was actually at one of these leadership guilds that I asked our head of IT transformation, asking if I could attend an SPC course. So he said, yes, and while you're going, please take one of your colleagues with. So off we went to Munich for our 4-day SPC course, got certified, enjoyed the half-price house a lot, having lots of beers there, and then we got back. And about 2 or 3 weeks after that, we started our first Leading Safe class for our coaches. And I didn't have a clue that what I got myself into. All of a sudden, my job changed dramatically because now we've got these teams, but the teams doesn't fully understand how the structure actually works. So getting from the 1st of August all the way to December, I spent most of my time training Leading Safe. And a lot of people will ask, so why did you train Leading Safe to developers and testers? So interestingly enough, in our training sessions, we had a good mix of people. We had everyone from executives all the way to developers in these sessions. And the real reason why we did Leading Safe was because of the PI planning simulation. None of the guys at Standard Bank was exposed to PI planning, and that PI planning exercise in Leading Safe really helped us to pull a lot of these concepts together to make it real. Obviously, afterwards, when we started to implement, we started to shift and move away from that and start rolling out more Safe for teams. So we trained about 1,000 people in Leading Safe before the end of 2016. So now that people were in their constructs, we had to move forward. What was the next logical step for us? So a target was set again to get people to get our teams into cadence. So we had this over 2,000 guys who were in their construct. We had to start moving them into cadence. So one of our CIOs of the card and payment space really set the tone for us. And they spent a good 2 months planning for that first PI. And something, again, that's maybe different to the usual way that we apply arts, we decided on doing a PI planning for about 4 arts, which consist in the card and payment space. We pulled those 4 arts together and planned a single PI for that. Now, the time it took was because that the ecosystem that we were working in, there was about 32 systems that we had to deal with there. So it made sense to bring these teams together so that we can actually have those discussions with the teams during the 2 days. And we really saw for the first time our business came together and applying things like the weighted shortest job first. Before we were using we had these pet projects on the side, and as a business owner, my priority is always the biggest. But now all of a sudden we had fixed capacity teams. So the payments or the card manco was sitting there and they had to work on what is our actual priorities. What are the most valuable things that we need to work on? And it really sets some direction for us. And I guess most of you have been involved in a PI planning session, but it really is a nice place where we pull a lot of things together, where before you were working unstructured ways. I also heard earlier about the number of meetings that a PI planning actually replaces. It's really phenomenal to see for the first time on the floor, you have your head of card and payments business there with your architects and with the team members as well. A really nice foundation to start moving forward. So before we had the first PI planning, you only saw the videos. We often played the video from Schroeder's. But this was really the first time where it became real to us what the actual value is of doing and implementing a PI and running with that. Now, luckily for me at this point in time, we also got 9 other SPCs, so I could move forward and move away from my job of doing the bulk of the training and move into the Africa regions portfolio. We also continue to do a lot more training. We spend a lot of time training role-specific courses. At the point when we did the design in 2016, we didn't go out and recruit 43 RTEs. There were no RTEs available in South Africa. So a lot of the work that we still need to be done after we've got ourselves into this cadence, sending people into teams, was to start building skill. We didn't have test engineers that was just running around in the organization. Really had to start building capability for these guys. So there's a lot of investment that needs to go with this approach. You set up the structures, but then you need to start investing in the people. So it really helped us to start running with the Scrum sessions, the advanced Scrum sessions, and we're soon going to launch our first RTE training as well for our RTEs to provide guidance to them in terms of what this actually looks like. How do we actually achieve and mature as an organization? Now, I didn't say much yet about leadership and culture, but this is really key for us. I talked about the need for the solution to be sustainable or for this implementation to be sustainable. And our group CI talks a lot about methods and technology will change, but to really make this sustainable is to make sure when people come to work, people are excited to come to work, people are challenged to come to work. Really had to invest in our people. And culture is such a big topic. We can probably spend another hour talking about what culture actually means, but some of the basic things that we did, we moved away from wearing suits to wearing jeans. There was no longer these rules. I still remember when I was a consultant as well, there's always these rules in terms of the way you have to dress. Now we're saying for our IT team, for our feature teams, you can come to work however you want. Some of the guys wear slops and shorts. Come to work, come and have fun at work, come and challenge yourself at work. Other initiatives that we hosted was for our senior and middle managers. So a lot of these guys had to go and change the way they used to work. So we set up turbocharged leadership programs. And there's always this thing that we talk about, the more senior you become in an organization, the further you get removed actually from the technology. So we had to spend quite a bit of time with these guys to really understand what is happening. What does DevOps actually mean? What does it mean to be a manager or working in this environment? So we had these programs set up and really start changing that actual behavior. We also set up obeyer rooms. This worked quite well. So if you look in our CTO obeyer, we probably have about 18 screens there that measures the maturity of our deployment pipelines. How are we progressing? How's the team progressing in terms of deployment pipelines? But this culture change also goes wider than just Standard Bank. So the IT community in South Africa is not that big. So we also set up a DevOps day across the 5 or 6 big banks in South Africa. So before it was a big no-no to start sharing with your competition what you are doing and how you are working. But we set up this every 6 months. We came together as the various banks in South Africa and started to share on this journey. Because it's quite common practice. If you look at people move around between the various banks, people jump from Standard Bank to the next bank, and then after a few years, they come back again. So investing just in your organization is not really going to help you. And we're starting to see examples of this in our Africa countries as well. Somebody from Ghana comes to South Africa, we teach them something in terms of chef. They go back and 2 weeks later, another bank in Ghana picked them up and they move to another organization. So it's really about actually building the community and building South Africa as a wider as a community instead of just focusing on Standard Bank. We also started to invest in our universities. How do we prepare our graduates to be better when they move into the organization. So a lot of the third-year project computer science and informatics students, they were still applying traditional SDLC methods. So when they were running their final year project, they still applied that, with one exception. So how do we started to work with them to see how do we better start improving the way that students get prepared and move actually into the job market. So let's look at some of the things that we've learned so far. So first of all, we talked quite a lot about culture. What does culture mean? How do we really make this sustainable? So very important, as a start, from the very beginning, start focusing on culture. And we ran a lot of initiatives. From the start, from 2014, we had initiatives. And sometimes those initiatives they start to lose direction. And that's okay. You start up new initiatives again. Keep at it to start building that energy back into your organization where engineering and people want you to come to work and shaping what work should actually look like. Continue to spend time investing in that to start shaping where you actually want to go. Getting business involved early is also really important. When we started this, I guess it was seen as an IT transformation, but we soon realized it's a lot more than just IT transformation. You need your business to be involved. You need to get the right product owners, product managers actually in your odds to really make it successful, to really have those priorities and things in place, to get decisions made on the fly. You don't want to have a product owner that's sitting in a different building that you need to have a call when your dev wants some insight in terms of what this actual solution should look like. And then a very important thing for us, don't forget about engineering. We often get stuck into the process and fixing the process, the dynamics of how people actually work, but we don't invest enough in our engineering, focusing on test-driven development or getting continuous integration, those kind of things running. I talked quite a bit about the leadership guild, which was definitely something that worked well for us. The last point is an interesting one, and I actually learned quite recently about this. We were struggling in our PIs to be able to make sufficient space and time for a lot of these things like refactoring. How do we improve our stability? And the thing that I realized, and again, this was from our actual ATM area, was to give our product managers need to have income statement accountability. So what this actually means is a lot of times product managers are really focused on building the new nice features that we can take to market, but we often forget about making sure this thing actually works. So when there's income statement accountability, when that ATM doesn't work, it also reflects back to that product manager because we're not generating income with fees from an ATM. So definitely something to think about is how do we actually make space when you do your PRs, and that there's about 20 or 30% time as well to work on some of those technical practices to make sure that you keep your stability and make sure your services are good. From an HR side, these are quite interesting things and questions that we still need to be answered. So we still have a leave approval system, but now in this new construct, who's supposed to approve your leave? Is it the line manager or the practice lead, or is it actually the team? So where does that actual workflow needs to go? So those are things that we're still thinking about. Reward and recognition is also a different element that we're working with a lot. So we're shifting and moving away from individual-based towards versus rather now moving into how do we use our PR objectives that we set after each PR? How does that link back to team-based toward team-based performance? And then traditional job descriptions. We've got a whole list of job descriptions, but we're asking our people now to double that. You're not just a feature analyst or you're not just a developer anymore, you do testing as well. And how does that talk to the way that we're actually setting up teams? We want to focus more on skills and capability than this is your job and this is what you need to do. Because there's a lot more about, we're not focusing on individual anymore, we want to be the team to actually be successful. Now our results, what have we seen over the past 3.5 years? What are some of the results that we're seeing? And it's really nice. I really went and spent some time with some of the teams on the ground as well. Some of the IBR team members that started this, the first actual Agile project, and asked them, what has changed? What's changed in your life from you moved away from this, the first Agile project to now being an RTE in an art? So they talked a lot about this, moving away from individual blame. So as a project manager, you went to this project execution committee, And you always get wrapped on the knuckles for why is the project late again? It's not because of the firewall rules, guys, where there was maybe a queue that's forming there to get the firewall rules in place. It was you. You were that the problem also started with why is this or that not happening? And this really shifted to we're moving away from individual blame to team accountability. What we also did was instead of having your developers and your operations guys separate, in our feature teams, we've got this focus now of you build it, you run it, to make sure that we start actually building quality into our products, because you're going to be the one coming back at Saturday night if there's a defect on that actual implementation. Work is also a lot more visible. So what we're seeing on the floors, we're doing a lot more Gemba walks. So we often see a lot of our senior executives walking the floors, actually looking at the work. What is the actual priorities? How are the teams progressing? So those traditional packs that we always sent off to our Rosebank building where our business people were sitting, all of a sudden they are now on our actual floors looking at the work. So a lot of that traditional moving information by an email or report, they now come to the work and actually observe how the teams are progressing. The second last one talks about how we progress. So in terms of before we had those pet projects, it's always like, what is my initiative that I'm currently working on? Where if you start implementing fixed capacity teams, it really helps your stakeholders and your product managers to focus on what are those the high value items that we need to deliver. And then finally, chasing deadlines. So we were always, a lot of times, we used things like effort estimators before, and the effort estimator will tell you this release will take 18 months. Business will tell you, well, you're going to get it done in 12 months. So from the beginning, you were actually setting yourself up for failure to be able to deliver. Now when we start using PI planning, it's the teams that decide how much work we can actually complete, how much work we can get done in a 10-week program increment. Now, some of the quantitative shift that we've seen, we talked about the time to market time. So there was some examples I talked to you about the ATM guys from moving from 700 days to get things into production to 30 days. We're also seeing a lot of the teams where we said it took us over 300 days. A lot of these guys are now able to deliver inside 30 days. Predictability is at 68%, and we're continuously seeing how this is actually improving. So a lot of our teams are currently in their third and fourth PIs, and we're seeing our predictability is improving. So like any developer, a lot of the guys, when they start off, they commit on too much. But they're starting to see now we need to push back because we want to get this actual predictability to between 80 and 100%. Now, when you talk about some of the numbers at the bottom, so I got a phone call this morning from one of my colleagues that helped me with the numbers. And she looked at the numbers and said that 74 agile teams is actually that was based on when we did 60% of the construct. So I have to apologize for that one. The real number is 209 teams. So we've got 209 agile feature and component teams, and the 43 RTs are actually today is we've got 73 RTEs. So that's some of the changes, and I guess we need to be honest. Sometimes you need to be transparent. So luckily we got the new numbers that we've actually moved to, and what our current numbers are at the moment. So what's next? We've been on this 3.5-year journey. What's the next wave that we're going on to? So a lot of the focus here talks about engineering. So we've done pretty well in terms of setting up a lot of the practices. We're doing our PI planning sessions. The teams are doing their stand-ups. We're doing our inspect and adapt workshops at the end of every PI. But the thing that we need to focus on is actual engineering. Our capability in engineering is still fairly weak, and to really move us to the next level of maturity is to improve our engineering practices. Our IT landscape is still also very complex. We talked about having over 2,000 systems in our IT landscape. So this is a continuous effort that we work on to start decommissioning some of the applications where there's duplication of functionality. And then our journey into Africa region. So I only started this in the Africa region space in March this year, and we've already done about 10 African countries. We really start moving, because most of our capability is sitting in South Africa and we deploy into the countries. How do we start making sure these countries speak the same language? A lot of the guys sitting in Nigeria or Ghana or Kenya are still used to the traditional way of work, the traditional SDLC. Now we want to get them involved in prioritization. We want to get them involved in execution, making sure when we start doing more continuous delivery, they don't have to wait a year or 8 months for something to get into their UAT environment. There's a lot more frequent releases getting into their workspace. So we continue to work with them to make sure that we can actually also start deploying in these countries a lot more often. And that for now is our story from Standard Bank's side. You are welcome to contact me either on email or follow me on LinkedIn. We've also got a program. So we've already had quite a number of banks and other organizations visiting us from New Zealand and from Australia. So whenever you guys are interested to come and look and see what we are doing, maybe combine it with your Cape Town holiday, feel free to come and join us in South Africa and come and see what we've done so far. Thank you very much.